Welcome back to the Bald Brothers Team podcast called All Things Real Estate. I am Aaron Zapata.
And I am Todd Anderson.
And we are your hosts for this podcast. What do we got talking about today?
Today, we want to talk about our fiduciary responsibility.
Ours?
Ours.
We have duties?
We have duties.
We have requirements?
We have many duties.
Oh, good.
Our responsibilities to our clients.
That's right.
And also, we want to talk about knowing the contract as a part of that responsibility.
Knowing the contract. And you know what we also cover, which, you know, we record this little intro after we record the show because we don't necessarily know what we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. But let's be honest, right?
It's true.
It's true. It's true.
On a wing and a prayer.
We're going to talk about termites.
That's right.
Everybody loves to talk about termites.
We weren't originally planning on talking about termites, but today you're going to get all about termites.
You're going to hear about termites. And we are the Bald Brothers Team. You can find us online at www.baldbrothersteam.com. We are licensed with Impact Properties. That license number is 019-22671. And we want you to find us online. If you like our podcast, we want you to subscribe to it. We want you to share it. We want you to let people know that you have found something that you want to share and tell people what you like about it.
That's right.
You ready to go?
Let's go.
Let's go. Here we go. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome back. Let's get right into it, Todd.
Let's get into it.
All right. We have a duty to our clients, do we not?
We do, and there's a special dictionary word for that duty, and that duty starts with it's an F word, but it's a long F word. It's
fiduciary.
Fiduciary.
That's right.
And it sounds really fancy. It sounds like we really know what we're doing.
Well, you know what? And if you are a good fiduciary, you do know what you're doing.
That's right.
Because a fiduciary duty to somebody or something, usually a person, is to put their needs above your own and to put their interest first.
That's right.
So we are agents, right? We're real estate agents. We do not act on our own volition in a transaction.
Mm-hmm. Everything that we have to do has to be for the benefit of our client as agents for that client. Now, that looks really good on paper, but how does that look in practice?
Well, in practice, for us, it starts with understanding the contract. Mm-hmm. You see, in California, real estate is practiced by realtors, and we do not have to involve attorneys necessarily to close an escrow. Mm-hmm. Now, you know this, Todd. I'm licensed in Tennessee, and most states have attorney closing instead of escrow.
Yeah.
Meaning that they have attorneys that review the contracts, they have attorneys that process the sale after the realtors have negotiated, and they take it to the closing, and you meet with your attorney, and you close everything with the attorney.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I learned when I was getting my license here in California, that in California it's very different because in several states, attorneys are involved. And it makes sense because if you read the contract, if you read an entire purchase agreement, just the purchase agreement, there is a lot of legalese in it. There's a lot of fine writing, and it can be very complicated and confusing.
The fine print is very fine.
Yes. Literally.
So I was at one of our Association of Realtors legal panels, and the attorney there, who is the attorney for the association, said, you guys need to understand, you are non-attorneys practicing law in California because you are advising on contracts that clients then sign, and that contract becomes a binding agreement. And usually agreements are drafted by attorneys.
Yeah.
Now, of course, our agreements that we use are drafted by a whole panel of attorneys at the California Association of Realtors.
Yeah, we are not writing the fine print.
We are not writing that fine print.
Very important to note that.
If we write it, we can get ourselves in trouble.
That's right.
And they always advise us, do not write your own contracts.
Yeah.
So we're not in the practice of that, but we are in the practice of understanding the contract to the degree that we know how it works.
Yeah, and that's an important point. We're not writing the legalese, the fine print, but we are managing the contract. We need to know the terminology that goes into it that actuates certain parts of the contract. And that's where it's really important to make sure that your realtor really knows and understands the contract. And when we get into negotiating, if you don't understand your own contract, you could be doing your client a disservice.
In fact, let's kind of go back one step.
Okay.
In a real estate transaction, because a lot of the people that we talk to, Todd, haven't sold homes for 20, 30 years. And they want to know, have things changed? Who's involved? And so typically, due to the complexity of transactions, you have a listing agent that represents the seller.
Okay.
Or the seller's agent. And that could be a team, like you and I are a team. Like we both represent one client. And then on that team, you may have someone like a transaction coordinator, which we do. So you have a team or an agent with their transaction coordinator on one side, and then you have a buyer's side, which is the buyer's agent.
Now, something to add to that, to add to the confusion, it's called a buyer's agent, but also for nomenclature, it can also be called a selling agent.
Not the seller's agent, but a selling agent.
Which adds to the confusion if people don't understand the terminology. So for simplicity, we call it the buyer's agent.
That's right. So you have the buyer's agent as well, and that could be a team, and that could also be their transaction coordinator. So those are the agents involved.
Yep.
And then you have an escrow company, and you have a lender, and you have a title company.
Yep.
Those are the 3 or 4, that's 5, right? 5 parties, major components.
Yeah, ish, sounds about right.
I can do the math on some days. Any day that ends with a Y, I might be able to do math on that day. So we have those parties involved, and we're advising the buyer and seller about what they're signing. Very, very crucial part of our job, and something that we as agents need to recognize that we're not attorneys. In fact, we didn't do that disclosure yet.
Yeah.
So if you are listening to this, we are not giving you legal advice. We're not giving you tax advice because we are not your attorney. We're not your CPA. But if you do want to sell your house, we would love to be your agent.
That's what we would love to be.
And
by the way, who are we?
Who are we? Aaron Zapata.
And Todd Anderson. We are the Bald Brothers team at Impact Properties.
That's right. And if you would like to go over to our website, you can go to baldbrothersteam.com. Or if you'd like to go straight to our YouTube channel, you can go to baldbrothers.tv.
Yep.
We're also on Instagram.
On the gram.
At
Bald Brothers Team.
That's right. And then also on Twitter at Bald Brothers Team. And we primarily represent Southern California. And so if you're looking at selling somewhere in Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside, or San Bernardino County, that's where we work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, okay.
I
totally, your license is 013565534.
Yes.
Mine is 020777325.
Thank you.
All right. Next time I'm going to test you. I'm going to have you do both of them, see if you can do it.
No, it's not going to work.
And you know why you don't know it? Is because I'm always the ones writing things in the contract and putting our license numbers down.
That's true. We have divided our roles, and Todd drafts the contracts 95% of the time.
I'm the one that actually looks at these contracts more often.
That's right. So let's talk about the procedure.
Yeah.
You have a listing, and the listing agent signs a listing agreement with the seller. The house goes on the market. It's now for sale. And what comes in?
Yeah. So once you list with the list with the buyer, list with the seller. Now you have a contract. So the house goes on the market.
Yep.
And then once the house goes on the market, then you start receiving. If everything is marketed well, we're glancing over all of that. Just to assume all that's been done.
We're
talking about contracts. Now you start having offers come in. We call them offers, but it's called in Southern California RPA, Residential Purchase Agreement. So you actually have a purchase agreement that's coming in from buyers, possibly multiple buyers, but let's isolate just one buyer. You have a purchase agreement that comes in from that buyer that is written on one of these forms that I talked about that has all the fine print. And from there, now the seller looks at the terms of that offer. It's not a binding contract until the seller signs it. If the seller doesn't agree to all the terms, and more often, I'd say 95% of our transactions, there's always something small we want to change in
99.9.
Okay, 99. That's much more accurate.
Yeah.
So there's always something small. Typically, we might issue what's known as a seller counteroffer. Now, keeping it simple, a counteroffer. It could be multiples, but in this case, one. And if we change those terms, this is where we need to understand the contract, understand the legalese that's in there. We issue that counteroffer that goes to the buyer. The buyer could choose to sign it, and if they sign it as is, we are now have a binding contract. However, they could choose to respond with a buyer counteroffer, and you can get like a ping pong ball, go back and forth multiple times. But at the point at which both buyer and seller have signed everything, now you have a binding contract.
That's right. And so you have that paper trail. You have the purchase contract. You have the seller counteroffer in our scenario here, and you have a buyer counteroffer. Everything has to be signed by all parties in order for it to be fully executed. And some other things about the contract is they have to have valid dates. You can't have an open-ended contract. You have to have a valid closing date. You have to have a valid, purchase price. You can't just have blanks in the contract. Everything has to be very clear so that everybody understands what they're signing.
That's right.
Now, the nature of our contracts is that they can be very confusing. But at the end of the day, they write them in such a way that they're supposed to be easily understood.
Yeah.
So one of the things that comes up is we work with agents all the time who do not understand the contract.
Yeah. And it's surprising. And by the way, I should mention that this is why it's very important when you're looking to hire an agent to represent you. It's important to make sure you hire an agent that understands the contract, understands and has experience. Don't just go based off of how long an agent's been an agent. There are many agents who maybe do 1 or 2 transactions a year, and every time they do the transaction, they have to relearn the contract. You don't want them practicing on you. You want to have an agent who knows and understands. But it is true. We come across that all the time where it's very clear that the agent on the other side of the contract doesn't fully understand their own contract. And it's not our job to do their job for them.
Nope.
It's our job to represent our clientele. And if they're not representing their clientele to the best of their ability as that fiduciary of responsibility, that's kind of on them.
So I'm going to give you an example of that. In the contract, it used to be that the terminology for termite inspections and work was written into the contract as a default section. And so an agent didn't have to really think about it.
It was automatically there.
It was there.
They would have to actually
remove it.
They would have to intentionally remove it from the contract.
So it was always in there.
Yeah.
And it was just assumed that the seller would pay for the termite work, and that was kind of the way the contract was written. But over the last few years, that whole section has been completely removed. There is now no mention in the purchase contract about termite at all.
Yeah. We actually have an example of this in a recent transaction where everything, we had a binding contract, the termite inspection
wasn't even mentioned.
Just don't even mention the clearance of the termite. Just the inspection alone was not even mentioned in the contract.
The word termite was never mentioned.
And to add to it, the buyer's agent, for some reason, during the inspection period, submitted a document stating that the buyer has waived their rights to do a pest inspection,
aka termite
of the property. So first of all, we didn't have it in the contract. Secondly, they proactively removed that right for them to do that inspection. And then they removed their inspection they hadn't removed the inspection contingency
waiver.
Yeah, they had done the waiver. And then they came to us and saying, where's the termite inspection? And we said, there is none. Well, it's in the contract.
No, it's not.
I thought, and this is where the gaslighting comes in for me. I'm thinking, am I crazy? So I went back to the contract.
You are crazy.
Yeah, but that's another story. Never the podcast for another time. But I went through it and I was like, it is not here. Okay, I'm not crazy. Let them know.
And I verified it too.
You verified it too. And I also asked our transaction coordinator to also look at it.
3 sets of eyes.
Because, 3 sets of eyes to make sure we are doing our fiduciary responsibility to our client to make sure we're not saying something that's not true and that we're not missing something.
The reality is a termite inspection, usually about $100, $125.
$100, yeah.
Not a big deal here in Southern California. But termite repair work,
that's a different story.
Can be huge.
Yeah, it could be just a few $100. It could be over $10,000, thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah.
In fact, Todd, what do you think is the largest termite estimate that I've ever seen on one of my transactions?
Okay, now that's a big question because you've been doing this longer than I have.
20 years.
I would say for me it was just under 20.
Ask you about
no,
you.
No, but I want to talk about me. I want to talk about me. Okay. I'm leading to something. Okay. There's a method to my madness. For me, it was just under $20,000 since I've been working with you.
Okay.
So you've been in the business longer than me, so it has to have been higher. I'm going to go $50,000.
You're going to go $50,000?
Yeah.
Well, before I tell you the number, I just want to remind people you're listening to the Bald Brothers Team All Things Real Estate podcast.
All things real estate, and today we're just covering some things.
That's right. All things real estate, which means we can talk about anything from A to Z, which happens to be my initials. We are found online at baldbrothersteam.com. You can follow us on Instagram. You can go to YouTube and subscribe. And in fact, if you find this content helpful, funny, if you like it, you want to share it, like it, subscribe, let people know about it, because we would love to hear from you and we'd love to see your comments.
Yep, and you can also call us at 833-305-BALD. BALD. 833-305-BALD. Okay, so what were we talking about? Oh, yeah.
The total amount, the biggest one I've ever seen was not $50,000.
Okay.
It was on a Spanish-styled 1930s home built in the Harbor Heights.
Okay.
And it was beautiful. The walls were like 12 inches thick because most of it was like some adobe. And it was designed by the same designer who designed the casino on Avalon. And so I had this opportunity to sell this beautiful ranch-style Spanish home. Beautiful. Termite bill, $29,000.
Wow.
Now, that's a big deal.
It's a huge
if
deal.
you're negotiating. That was in the day when the seller had to pay for it.
Yep.
So guess what? Seller had to pony up some money and end up closing that deal. Nowadays, it's not in the contract. And so you have to know these things as you're writing your contract with your buyer's agent. If you want termite to be done as the buyer, you have to ask for it.
Yeah.
Once you have a binding contract, and if you missed it, guess what? It's not in there.
Yeah.
So you have the contract, the seller's counteroffer, they all go back and forth. Termites never mentioned. Guess what?
What?
There's no termite.
There's no termite.
I mean, there might be termites. There might be termites.
There probably are termites.
but it's not required.
Yeah.
And I still get this question from agents all the time, Todd. Well, what about the lender? The lender's going to need the termite done. Actually, no.
Not if it's not in the contract.
Not in the contract.
If it is in the contract and the lender sees that, well, then yes, it does need to be done. But if it's not mentioned in the contract, it does not need to be done for the lender.
So that's just one example.
Yeah.
Okay, there could be other things specific to a property.
Yeah.
For example, if you're buying a property and it has like an ADU or an auxiliary dwelling unit that's in the back and it's built on, and you want to know, are there permits? Well, if you don't specifically state in your purchase contract that, verification of those kind of things are going to be a contingency, you could be out of luck as well.
Yeah.
Because you didn't take the time to think through your contract, what you wanted. I'm going to go back to termite real quick.
Okay.
Okay. Detached garage.
Okay, that's a good one.
Right? Most termite specifically covers the, I guess we should have called this termite. We're talking about all the termites. Maybe we could. No, so we were talking about
the structure.
The structure, right? Most common understanding of termite is that it's the dwelling that needs to be inspected.
Yeah,
If you have a
not the detached structures.
detached garage that nobody lives in, or a detached chicken coop, or whatever it is, right? If it's detached, usually those are not covered. So if you want those covered, you have to ask for them.
Yeah, and actually we could tell a lot of stories about transactions. We actually had one a few months ago that once again the agent didn't understand that part of the contract and assumed that because the garage was not inspected that was a flaw. But no, per the contract, we fulfilled exactly what the the sellers were responsible for.
Right. So again, going back to your fiduciary duty to your clients, our duty is to understand how the contract works. If there's going to be a change, once the contract is fully executed, escrow is opened, something else is discovered. What do we do then, Todd? Something's discovered. We have to do something. We need to make a change, but everybody agrees to it. How do we do that?
And I should mention before saying how we do it, expect that that's quite often the case. There's always adjustments after we have a binding contract, and we do that in the standpoint of filling out an addendum that both parties agree to. Now, there are several different types of addendum. There's addendums for requests for repairs. There's this most standard is just called an addendum, and you can kind of write anything you want on that addendum, whether it's a price reduction or sometimes it's even addendum correcting something in the original contract, such as the spelling of a name.
Correct.
If a name is misspelled, we've got to correct that. Well, we can't go back and change the original contract. We change it on an addendum.
Or if the street name as a street instead of a drive.
Yeah.
Like those are just fixed
simple
on an
things.
addendum.
Those are very simple things, but they have to be documented.
Happens all the time.
Yep.
Also, a home inspection happens and something is discovered. You can do an addendum. You can also do a request for repairs, which is technically an addendum, but just a very specific kind
addendum.
of addendum. Another addendum could be that the seller decides to include certain things to go with the property.
Yeah.
For example, there could be, yard furniture.
Yeah.
Some great, barbecue set or something that's not affixed to the property that doesn't go with it, but should go. Right.
Or the seller has a bunch of junk they just don't want to pack.
Or the seller, yeah. I mean, we've had that situation though.
We have had that,
where the seller says, "Look, I can't take all this stuff. I need to leave it." Well, you can't just leave your stuff at a property after you close escrow and think that the buyer's going to be okay with it.
Yeah.
You got to get permission. You got to put it in there because the contract states that the seller will vacate the property. It includes taking all your junk.
Yeah.
So you have to know those things.
Yeah.
Because it's important to make sure that you're going through the transaction and following everything appropriately. Now, as agents, Todd, you and I elevate this and understand the contract very, very high. There are some agents that we get contracts and they're incomplete.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, this person needs some training. And they can get training. They can get training from their local association of realtors. They can get training from their brokers. It's always concerning to me when a broker's making some mistakes, and I've had brokers over the years, because I've been doing this for over 20 years, that say, well, we've always been doing it this way. And I remember the attorney at the time for association and for our escrow division 15 years ago. Her name is Rose Pothier. Fantastic. Most real estate brokers, been in the business 20 plus years, know her name. And she said, just because everybody's going down the freeway at 85 miles an hour doesn't make it legal or right. The cop can pull you over at any time, any one of you, and you're all going to get a ticket. So just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
So guess what I did, Todd? I had a question. I was in a debate with a broker recently. I called the California Association of Realtors legal hotline, and guess what I did?
What'd you do?
I talked to an attorney.
Yep.
Because I'm not an attorney.
That's right.
And I said, attorney, I need your advice, and I need you to you got to decide. I'm willing to say I'm wrong if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong, but I'm always willing to learn.
Yep.
Has it changed? And he said, no, it hasn't changed. You're right.
Yep.
Move forward. I'm like, yes.
And there's a lesson in that too. Part of your fiduciary responsibility is to be able to acknowledge when you don't have all the answers, but you will always seek out the answer. And oftentimes that involves calling one of our attorneys that we have on a retainer that we have access to. And you and I both done it on a number of occasions with transactions just to make sure. Because at the end of the day, our job is to protect the interests of our client. Not our own interests, not the interests of anybody else, but our clients who have hired us, and we have a contractual obligation to them.
We do. We have a contractual obligation. We have an ethical obligation. We have even a financial obligation to make sure that they're protected, right? These are homes that you and I, Todd, do not own.
Yep.
But we get the blessing and the opportunity to walk our clients through the obstacles. And when I started back in 1996, I was a part-time telemarketer for an owner of a real estate company. I remember the purchase contracts, I think, were 8 pages. Now they're like 27.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Right, now they're like 27. And so
were they written in crayon too?
They were. So we hope that this has been helpful for you today.
Yep.
We want to encourage you, if you are listening to this on our podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on
all the podcast places. iHeartRadio.
That's right. If you like it, leave us a good review. We would love to read that, and we'd love to have you back here on our next episode. We're going to close out here with some information about where you can get a hold of us, because we want to thank you for being here today. You've been listening to the Bald Brothers podcast called All Things Real Estate with the Bald Brothers team, and we are grateful that you have joined us today. Come back, because we're going to have future episodes where we talk about lots of different things, all things pertaining to real estate, and we want to thank you for your time today. So God bless. Have an awesome day.